hopefully more people will come in. It is a great honor to have Professor Honeycutt here. He's a very distinguished faculty of LSU. He's Distinguished Professor of Communication Studies, BASF Professor of Excellence in LSU. He's a pioneer and international expert on relationships, daydreaming, imaginary interactions, and the list goes on. He has 8 books on Amazon, and 2 more are coming very soon. And he did his PhD in communication from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 1987. He has got numerous awards. He has a Distinguished Book Award in year 2006, LSU Rainmaker as a Senior Scholar in 2011, LSU Distinguished Faculty in 2012. Southern States Association honored him for his 25 years and more of work in 2013. And he's a Senior Managing Editor of Imagination, Cognition, and Personality Journal. So Professor Honeycutt will today talk about interpersonal relationships, various conflicts, and how we make them work.
Yep. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to welcome you to LSU this morning with all of the, I knew it was difficult getting in here with the Alzheimer's walk. So I want you to think of the last argument you had. Maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was this morning. So the last disagreement I had was asking the police officer of how I can drive over here, and he was not very clear, so I had a C permit. He said, you can go this way. Well, I actually broke the law in that I went down the street over here. It says do not enter, but I knew I could get quickly to the building, and so that's what's called a retroactive imagined interaction. So we have, what I'm going to discuss is how we argue in everyday life, and give you a couple of tips, and I'll show a video clip. We argue constructively and destructively. The problem is we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. There's an old saying, practice makes perfect. It does not make perfect if you keep repeating the same bad behaviors. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, and I think you'll enjoy the videotape and where you will analyze. So there's 3 types of basic conflict tactics we use. The first is just cooperation. It's direct and nice. You didn't see cooperation with the recent Senate hearings with the Judge Kavanaugh hearing. So you're direct and nice. In the way we often do this is through, can you hear me? Is through pseudo agreements where you go, yeah, whatever you say, dear, even if you don't agree with it. So this is a win-win strategy for both partners. The second one is competitive arguing. It's I win, you lose. This is what you saw in the recent Supreme Court hearings that have been going on these past few weeks. The importance is that you want to win at all costs, compared to the other person. Let me sit a little bit blurred. Yeah, okay. If I hit enter, will that go to, let's see. Okay, yeah. So yeah, threats, demands, coercion, intimidation, hostility. Did any of you see any of these Supreme Court hearings by any chance? So like Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, got upset. The judge got upset. So you ridicule, personal criticisms, put downs, name calling. We tend to do this when we're very, very frustrated and we know our argument is not going well. And one of the things that happens when we argue over important things, most people have really 3 or 4 basic lines of argument in their position. And then what happens is they run out of them, they exhaust them, and then they repeat them over and over. The reason we repeat them over and over is it's easier to keep doing that rather than to try to spontaneously think up new arguments as we are going along. So that's called being a cognitive miser. The thing about thinking up, repeating these arguments is we don't have to change our plan or our strategy. Like really subconsciously what's happening when you repeat your argument is you tend to repeat it with a higher voice volume. So sometimes my voice here raises as I'm trying to emphasize a point. And a person's really saying, well, maybe you're hard of hearing and you didn't hear what I just said, so I will repeat it. So it's this is competition, is what that is. Okay, avoidance. This is another conflict strategy. So there's fight, flight, and freeze. So in avoidance, you're just withdrawing. You don't want to discuss it. The idea is to keep the tensions buried. Well, when you keep the tensions buried, you go back in your mind and replay the disagreement. So verbally denying that there's a conflict, withholding a complaint when confrontation is deemed too costly, making irrelevant remarks. Often we use irrelevant remarks in terms of interruptions to get the person off the topic, trying to change the topic. A big thing about avoidance is the chilling effect. This is where you've discussed this argument or this disagreement with whoever this person is before, and you are fearful. You're making a prediction. Well, if we've discussed it once, we've discussed it 1,000 times. I know how the person's going to react. Therefore, there's no point about it. That's a chilling effect. And so the persons are trying to avoid that. So those are the three conflict tactics. Now, constructive conflict, some of the things that we do is we avoid reciprocating negative emotions. For an eye doesn't work because the aggression that is met with aggression is seen as socially inept. Another way of saying an eye for an eye is the old maxim of I can forgive, but I cannot forget. That's different from I can forgive and forget. So we use avoidance rather than the distributive, as I earlier discussed. So listen to the other party and ask them what they fear. Why do they have this fear? Now the thing is, all of these tips up here, these are what I sort of call mindless, trivial tips, in that they're easy to read. They're based on rationality, but I'm going to get into that in a second. But that often fails because we're frustrated. Yeah, I know I should be nice, but since you have been mean to me, it's hard to reciprocate. So the rationality approach devolves into irrationality, and you saw some of that during the Supreme Court hearings. Agree to disagree. That's what a lot of those senators, some of them are saying. So one has the right to become angry, so I'm not going to go through all of these. Here's what I do want to go through. Okay, this is very important. This is an acronym. Love. Now I can say, what does love mean to you? Well, we all know what that means. Passion, care for another person. But an acronym is a short way to remember ingredients for memory. So the L stands for listen. The O stands for observe. V means verify or validate. And E means express. So LOVE. That's easy to remember. So let me go through this. Complain but don't blame. Complaints are different from criticism. When we complain, we use these I statements. So I feel frustrated that you did not help in the project. I feel frustrated you didn't mow the lawn. A criticism is a personal attack on somebody else. We do this all the time subconsciously. It's a personal attack. You didn't mow the lawn because you're so lazy. So you're attacking the other person's character in a criticism, but in a complaining, it's a comment on the actual situation, whatever the area of disagreement is. Does everybody understand the difference between complaints are good, criticisms, personal criticisms are bad. So use I statements instead of you. Describes what's happening, be clear. Okay, be polite, be appreciative. Now, so when we come up with these rules for arguing, I'm going to go through 4 of them in a minute. The thing is, we often don't know that the rules exist until we violated it. You don't know that the speed limit is 55 until an officer pulls you over. Then you're immediately reminded, or you don't think about it. So, rule violation. So, if I ask you, what are the rules for politeness at the dinner table? You know, some people may say, don't shovel the food in too. It's hard to identify that until, oh, you're eating too fast. Put your elbows down. So we often, it's hard for some people to identify rules, and I'll get into that. So there's prescriptive rules, what we should do, and what you should not do. What you should do, and what you should not do. So when you look at any type, these are also known as commissions and omissions. A rule for what you should do would be something like be polite. I can say the same thing as a restrictive rule. Don't be impolite. You see what I'm saying? But this gets into studies on memory. Is it easier to remember a prescriptive rule, particularly when you're a small child, or a restrictive rule? And some research indicates it's easier for little kids, basically under the age of 4, for restrictive rules. It's easier for them to incorporate those. Okay, these are the 4 rules for arguing. So here's the acronym, PRCC, almost like PARC. So positive understanding, rationality, conciseness, and consideration. And these occur in all human relationships, whether it's with a supervisor, teacher-student, mentor-mentee, a teammate, a best friend. These are universal rules. So how did we discover these these rules? What's research that I've done, and also research in Australia. They had people look at a videotape. They're going to look at this videotape in a minute, of people who were arguing. They're just arguing over a very serious issue. They videotaped them. They then went back and they played the videotape. So this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of that quantum thing. They went back and watched themselves on the videotape and say, can you write down what the rules for arguing are? What do you think is a good rule and what's a bad rule? And also stop the tape at any time. They did a series of experiments. First, it was difficult for people to identify what the rules of arguing. But then they went back and looked at it again and they said, I did stop the tape at any time that a person has violated what you consider a nice rule for arguing. This was easy for them to do. Rule violation is what's happening. And so these people wrote down all of these things. And then what they did is they took all these characteristics of arguing and they used this technique to reduce them to what are called underlying simple rules and factors. All of the examples that the people wrote down reflect examples of these underlying rules, and there's 4 of them. And so they did this in Australia, then I did it over here in the United States. So the first rule is positive understanding. So you're able to, examples are, you're able to say you're sorry. Now ask yourself as we go through this, how often do you do this during a disagreement with a person? You know, with some people you may be able to say you're sorry. Like you're probably more likely to be able to do that with a supervisor or your boss. Maybe compared to a person like your child or somebody who's a subordinate. With a supervisor, you're probably able to say you're sorry more than with a subordinate. You see what I'm saying? So these are contextually driven or person driven, as well as sort of reflecting a personality, a trait. Resolve the problem so both are happy. Listen. See the other person's viewpoint. Be honest and say what you think. Explore alternatives. Don't dismiss. Now, the way these are written here, these are prescriptive. This is saying, this is a restrictive rule. Words like don't, avoid, what you should not do, those are restrictive rules. But most of these up here are prescriptive. Able to say you're sorry, say what you should do. Things like that. The next one is rationality. These are restrictive rules, what you should not do. So it's saying don't be irrational. Don't get angry. You should not argue. Don't raise the voice. Don't lose your temper. Don't be aggressive. Try to remain calm. Those are rationality. So we have positive understanding and rationality. Happy people in happy relationships tend to use more positive understanding than people in more conflictual relationships. Conciseness or focusing. Stay on the topic. So like complaining, not criticizing. Stay on the topic. Be specific. Stick to the issue. Be consistent. Keep to the main point. Clarify the problem. All of those examples up there are prescriptive rules except for number 2, which is don't generalize. That's what you should avoid. So positive understanding, rationality, and conciseness. PRC. Everybody following those so far? So keep PRCC in mind as we look at the videotape. Consideration. The last one. So the word you're supposed to be considerate while arguing. Now these are restrictive rules. Don't talk too much. Don't monopolize. One of the things that was interesting in the Supreme Court hearings is most of the senators, regardless of party, were criticized for basically giving 4.5-minute monologues or platforms stating their position or whatever, and then allowing the person's giving the testimony to speak for like 30 seconds. But most of them were talking too much. Don't make your partner feel guilty. Mimic. Sarcasm or ridicule is really, really bad. If you want to make a person in an argument feel it's ridicule. Another word for that is it's contempt. Don't push your view as the only one. My view is right, your view is wrong. Don't be judgmental. Don't talk down to that's patronizing speech. So like if you know someone who's been really, really ill and you're saying, well, how are we feeling today? It's a little bit patronizing. So those are the 4. Now, let's see if we can get the clip here. So remember, PRCC and love, listen, observe, verify, and express. That may be a little bit blurred. That one, full screen, or?
Yeah,
The one on the way on the right.
This
Got it.
full screen?
There.
Yep.
That's, well, we'll see how it goes. This is a married couple. No, it's not a married couple. This is a intimate couple, and it's fictional, but it actually illustrates a lot of the principles. Over the years, I've had tape libraries of hundreds of couples, and we code and watch them argue. In my lab, it's called a Matchbox Lab. Bring couples to the lab, and getting couples to argue is getting dyads, two people, whoever it is, getting them to argue is the easiest thing to do in the world. I can get people to argue in 3 minutes. The way we do it is we give them a survey of all these pleasing and displeasing issues and have them survey. To what degree is this a thing pleasing to you? So like one of the topics might be watching sports. Or how much do you like watching sports? So one person says 7, they really like it, and the other person says 1, they don't like it. Hobbies, whatever. So for the pleasing topics, it's where they both agree on its ratings. A displeasing topic is where they disagree. And so this couple here, they live together, and they're going to argue. They do constructive and destructive arguing. So I'll stop it at a couple of points. So let's see how this goes. Can everybody see it, even though it may be a little bit blurred?
I see Sam's chicken. Chicken and rice.
Can you hear it?
What's that supposed to mean?
Nothing. Didn't we have that last night?
No, we had chicken and pasta last night. Tonight we're having chicken and rice.
Oh, I see.
Now, what she's doing right here is non-verbally, through the eye rolls, showing contempt, lack of rationality, lack of consideration. She's non-verbally showing contempt. So, I will say this, historically, many men, because they had not been socialized in the earlier generations to communicate all these emotions, happiness, surprise, fear, joy, anger, things like that, they non-verbally communicate their emotions, particularly anger and contempt. And one way we do it, burrowed lips. There's 635 facial muscles, burrowed lips, roll the eyes. This is very common. Roll the eyes. So you show contempt with your eyes, but you can also do it through sarcasm and ridicule. Well, this is what she's doing with her eyes. Can you see that? Can you see that? So people in more conflictual relationships do this subconsciously. They're not aware that they're doing it. There's actually a few people who do it as a personality trait based on their socialization and upbringing. So this is contempt right here. She's upset. Okay, sarcasm, just fine. You saw it again? Nope. Look at him. So a lot of Arguing is done non-verbally through facial expressions and gestures.
Chicken's a little dry.
Okay, did you hear what he just said? What did he say?
Chicken's a little dry.
The chicken is a little dry. Now that is an example of a complaint. It's specific. He's talking about the chicken. It's not a criticism. You know, a criticism would be if he said, "You're a lousy cook." That's a complaint. Now, what's your reaction to it?
It's fine with me.
Okay, defensiveness, that's fine, that's normal. Sure, we're going to defend ourselves. This is great. Now, before she took the plates away, would you have said she is more upset than he is? What do you think? What's your opinions? He's upset too.
I think she's more upset than he is.
Yeah, at this point, she has a higher level. They're both upset, but hers appears to be a little bit higher based upon the nonverbal facial cues. Now she's using avoidance. Remember? Avoidance is a conflict. So she's trying to flee. Okay, sure.
What was that for?
Next time you can make your own dinner.
There's avoidance. So she is, you know, fight, flight, freeze. Earlier it was sort of flight. It was freeze is also defensiveness. But flight. So she's gone to the room.
Go away.
Is this really what it's about? I'm sorry the chicken was completely dry. Not everyone has an iron stomach like you. Becca, come on.
Get out.
Is this how it's going to be? You get mad at me and you become a 6-year-old child? Come on, just...
You get out of my room and leave me alone.
Oh, it's your room now. When did you start paying the rent?
Excuse me?
I think you heard me.
You are unbelievable.
Yeah, I can start this.
Fine, you want your room? You can have it. Why don't you take the dirty laundry while you're at it? Can I go in the kitchen? Is that all right with you? You know what? You can have that too. Here's some dirty dishes. I guess now I should just drop out of school since you're paying for that too. I guess I'll just sit around all day and wait for you to come home.
Honestly, I don't know what I would do if I just spent my money all day long. I'd probably die the first time I had anything left on my paycheck to save.
That's rich. Every cent of that money goes back into making you happy. I use it to buy your shampoo and your clothes and your stupid potato chips.
Exactly how much happiness did I get from your shopping spree at Nordstrom?
Okay, so they're not showing, so far, there's very little positive understanding. There's a few examples here and there. Rationality is sort of in between, but they raise their voices. Now, and then consideration, they're really inconsiderate in terms of those examples I gave. However, let me remember the idea of conciseness. Be specific. Don't generalize. Be consistent. Keep to the main point. Clarify the problem. So the example of conciseness and be specific, don't generalize. Do you think they're both concise, or one person's more concise than others? With some examples? There's no right or wrong answer here. There would be a right or wrong answer if you were a coder and you're using a coding scheme, and we would actually count up each. I have the transcript here. We would count what you do is these electronically transcribe and you code each statement. But any gut feelings or predictions? There's no right or wrong answer. Anybody have an opinion on conciseness?
It seems like they're both really inconcise. I mean, they are using specific examples, but they're all over the board. They have a lot of issues that it seems like, I mean, they're not just about the dinner.
Yeah, they're not about the dinner. He gives, what he talked about, what the chicken being not cooked, and then he just made a statement, and she's very concise at certain particular points. But you'd have to actually have to look at the transcript. So, there. Okay, let's go on. So there's avoidance. Now this is scene 4. We've been through 3 scenes. This is scene 4. This is going to be examples of constructive conflict. So sort of arguing, remorse, and make up.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I should have eaten dinner and just thanked you for it.
Oh, that's positive understanding.
I should have told you why I was upset instead of throwing your dinner in the sink. I've just been feeling really unappreciated lately, like almost ignored. I feel like I go to school and I'm doing great, and then I come home and I'm like a kindergartner in a chemistry classroom. I'm looking at the chalkboard and I'm scribbling away my coloring book, but I'm still not making any sense of the formulas, and even though I'm doing my best, it's all a waste because you aren't pleased.
So they're showing the 4 elements here of PRCC at this moment. She's very concise. She feels like she's doing great in school, and she's not doing as well in chemistry and things like that.
I didn't realize that you're having such a hard time. I know this is a rough time for us, but I really do love you, and I really do want to know what I can do to make you feel more appreciated.
Maybe if you could just help me out a little more. I mean, I feel like you expect me to do everything.
You know, in terms of positive understanding and should be able to say you are sorry, it's really hard for a lot of us to do that.
I'm trying to run, but I keep hitting a wall. Like maybe we could just work out a budget.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay, working out a budget, very specific, focused, concise.
And tomorrow night, I'll make dinner. Chicken beans okay?
You know that little black number I wore last night? That was from Nordstrom.
Okay, so they end up very constructively. And contempt, one of my old mentors, his name was John Gottman. He was at the university. He was at Illinois, where I studied at, and I worked in his lab. And he's been on television over the years, written millions of books. He says, in terms of human beings, contempt really, quote, ought to be outlawed in arguing. But because we're human beings, we can't do that. And so a lot of these tips for arguing, they're based on the second element, PRCC, rationality. Well, what happens when you're frustrated? And the irrationality sets in. Then we have belligerent, competitive arguing. So it's I lose, I win, you lose, rather than I win, you win, we win. One of the things that's interesting with the recent Supreme Court hearings, you hear this all the time, is both sides, there's very little compromise, which is the ideal. And the balance is very, very little compromise. And that's what life is about. You compromise in your everyday life. As you're driving a car down the interstate, you're weaving in and out of traffic. You're going to let this person in traffic. You're going to cut the person off. That happens all the time. We actually did a study years ago on road rage too. Do you have any questions? I hope you've enjoyed this. Any questions on arguing?
Well,
Or recent? Think of the most recent argument. Go ahead.
when you're in the middle of arguing, it's very difficult, as you say, to get back to some communication. So,
I know it's because of the emotions and
Yeah.
passion.
Yeah, but you get so ingrained in it that it just happens automatically.
That's why I try to use the acronyms of love, listen, observe, verify, and that's easy to remember. Or PRCC, positive understanding, rationality, consideration, and
So how can you
conciseness.
slow it down to where the person cannot be so defensive? I mean, you can say, I'm sorry, I'd like to listen to you, or, you know.
When you argue, do you tend to increase your speech rate? You speak faster than
Faster
you
and louder, yeah.
and scream loud, or have a larger voice volume.
Yes, definitely. It's like I've learned to realize this. I mean, they've learned to tell me, you know, you're speaking loud, and I've learned to do that too. Like, hey, you're raising your voice, because you don't realize you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hard to do this. I have jokingly told my students, take the list of examples that I showed you on the PowerPoint with you next time you're arguing. Just pull out that list and say, oh, no, you can't do that. But I do think the acronyms of love,
Yeah.
and, you know, John Lennon had a song, All You Need Is Love. But love and PRCC can help if you can remember, access those acronyms.
So remember, first listen, and even though you may not agree, just accept it temporarily until,
Yep.
you know, you can make peace with it or make communication with it.
You know, even if you don't agree, like I mentioned pseudo agreements, there's also a thing, it's called attentiveness signaling. Nodding your head, things like, you may not agree with it, but you can sit there, nod the head, and if you don't follow the person, you can ask them, can you restate what you mean? What are you saying here? Things like that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this
They might
does
be upset about
require
it.
some degree of rationality. And there's all this research in evolutionary psychology on the display of anger and why people are irrational, to protect resources and things like that. But you know, we try and do the best we can. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, so you were talking about like pseudo apologies and pseudo agreements.
Yeah, pseudo agreements.
Are those examples of like avoidance?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
You're given the illusion. If you use the pseudo agreement, it's really an illusion of listening, even though you may not agree. It is a type of avoidance. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That type of thing.
Right.
Yes.
So the clip that you showed us is an example of two people who are peers, you know, they're on a sort of
Yeah, they're
level.
peers
But when you're arguing
with a super. Go ahead.
with a supervisor or something like that, you know, they have, you know, rank over you, you know, there, it seems like there's
These would change. Yeah. You would use. It depends if you're in the role of the subordinate or the supervisor, if you're in the role of the subordinate, there would be more positive understanding if you wanted to continue to work with a person, even if you think they're wrong. There would be more rationality, consideration, and conciseness. The supervisor, unfortunately, has his or her or their choice in using those with the person. Yeah, these vary across different types of relationships. The examples I was using were really more among peers. Yeah.
I really like to talk, but I think actually your question and the last question really would benefit from more of an elaboration on what you mean by verify. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of conflict.
Another word for verify is validate.
Right, and so I think to address those things like
so validating what they say, you could use a pseudo agreement. You would use a paraphrase. Is what you're saying? Is what your position is?
Yeah.
Whatever. Am I understanding what you are saying? Or I understand what you're feeling, but if you disagree. So that's what I mean by validate. You're signaling or communicating to the other person that you understand what they're saying. So I use the words verify and validate.
No, I think it's that one concept has done a lot for my interpersonal arguments with my significant other. It slows me down because it makes me go, oh, this is what you're saying, and it makes me rethink about what I heard.
Yeah, now when you're rethinking about what you heard, that's what I call an imagined interaction. You are talking to yourself and your significant other in your mind. And that's a whole other body of study. Yeah.
Well, I found that a great way to slow down. I think the same thing could apply to faculty advisors too, because my faculty advisor, is very much, there's many things that I disagree with him on. And so the first thing I have to do is say, I understand your position. However, this is why I have my position. And I feel that softens the blow a little bit when we're having a disagreement, because he kind of goes, okay, you're not just trying to blow me off because you think you know better because you're the student and the young guy. So I found that to be helpful.
That's one example. Somebody else? Oh, yeah.
How clearly defined is the difference between like a criticism and a complaint?
Okay. Complaints are specific and focused. I am sorry. The reason I was so late is because a person says, I am sorry you were so late. Versus you always statements actually tend to reflect criticisms. You're always this. It's a comment on the person's personality, their disposition, their fortitude, whereas their personal attacks. It's a meta comment on their character. Whereas a complaint is domain, or it's very focused and specific on whatever the area of disagreement is. So, a person might say, I don't like it that you always watch, you're so irresponsible, you don't pay attention to me, and therefore you're addicted to, ESPN football, even though it may cause brain concussions. That would be a combination of a complaint, a criticism, but at the end, even though it may cause brain concussions, that's actually a complaint cause. It's very specific. Does that help you, or have I confused you more?
I think so. So in the video, the guy used this, he used the phrase, I think the chicken is dry.
Yeah.
So that's considered a
that is a complaint. If he said you're a lousy cook, or you are a lousy cook, or that would be, if you use the word lousy, that would be a criticism. If you say you're a bad cook, that's actually a criticism. Now, if he said you do not know how to cook chicken, that is actually a criticism. It's too bad you don't know how to cook chicken, but you know how to cook spaghetti very well. That would be a criticism.
So even if, because
See, there's a lot of easy way. I can show you. There's a whole coding system for how to code them, but there's a fine line in some cases between them. It depends on each statement and how it's worded. It's all the wording of the statement and how inclusive or exclusive it is. Yeah.
More about being specific.
Pardon? Yeah, specificity. Specificity is complaints.
Okay, and non-specific, general.
Vagueness, more generality. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, yeah.
But in the literature, when you say, I feel this way because, depends on what comes after the word because. That tends to be more of a complaint. But if I say, I feel this way because you're so irresponsible, that would actually be a criticism.
I think chicken is the major problem here, particularly dry chicken, because it's been going on for decades.
We always
say this chicken is dry, so much so that these old, she calls to see what we're having for dinner. If we're having chicken, she's having dinner somewhere else. Avoids it.
But it's a lot better now than it was before. It's
Yeah, also, I suppose it depends if the chicken is rotisserie, if it's fried, if, you know.
You have to try to make it diet healthy. Healthy chicken, nobody wants it.
Yeah, KFC's got all those dishes, and Raising Cane's, etc. Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, preaching to that once in a while.
So, I've enjoyed being here, talking with you, and I wish you well. I wanted this videotape so somebody could maybe watch it on YouTube, so you can go back and play it for your significant other. And if you want a copy of this, you can email me at my email address, which is stoney@lsu.edu. You can do that, and I'll send you this. I have a handout that I can send you. So remember, love and PRCC. Those are two easy acronyms to remember. Thank you so much. Oh yeah.
I have a comment, since you do talk about always and never and you never. I've learned that you have to learn to process in your mind. It helps you slow down when somebody tells you that. You have to ask yourself, that's not true. Sometimes you do it to yourself. You'll tell yourself, I never do anything right. Well, is that actually true? No, I've done this and this. And that helps slow the mind down for me, and I've read it in other books. They just don't use those words.
Yeah, when we hear you always statements, the immediate reaction is defensiveness.
Right.
It's like you put me into a corner.
Right.
Okay. Because as human beings, we think, even if you do, we tend to think for our own self-concept, we don't always do it, even if others do think we do. So, defensiveness is a reaction to that. So,
Well, thank you very much.
thank you.